have in me the ability to make you a better you. So if you work hard, focus, stay on point, you can do anything. Trust me.
We made this track to tell everybody they can follow their dreams.
It was a monumental game for A&M and Tampa. It was a monumental game. Somebody had to lose, and thank God it was them this time.
We knew it was going to be a battle. Look at Jake Ave's record. 202 and 36, I think. Some off-the-wall figures.
And nobody would play him because they didn't want to take a chance of getting beat. But the truth of it is,
over 46,000 tickets. Blacks were sitting in the east stands. The whites were sitting in the west stands. And the score wound up 34-28.
The only thing we proved that we wasn't inferior, that we were not inferior, and we were not afraid.
For one night, for 160 minutes, we was better than them.
The Creole seasoning is a sodium-free and sugar-free.
All right, good afternoon. It's Wednesday, June 3rd, 2020, and you are watching a live instant reaction show, the BCSN SportsWrap, featuring myself and AD Drew, along with Dr. Cavil's Inside the HBCU SportsLab. There you see Dr. Cavil, as well as we think Charles Bishop might be joining us, possibly even Mike Washington from his show. And we've got instant reaction from the breaking news out of Tallahassee, Florida, in which the Florida A&M University Board of Trustees Committee on Athletics approved by a count of 5-0 the Florida A&M University Athletics proposal to move the athletic programs from the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference to the Southwestern Athletic Conference and send it to a full vote of the FAMU Board of Trustees. And that vote is scheduled to take place tomorrow morning, late morning, sometime after 10:30. Of course, there were some provisions, a little hiccups, which we'll kind of talk about, which kind of came out. And so, as you see Doc Cavil already wearing his FAMU hat along with his SWAC polo in honor of the potential merge that we see. And of course, Doc and AD, we had a chance to listen to the proposal. So let's start kind of just general thoughts, Dr. Cavil. Well, your instant thoughts as you listen to the proposal by AD Gaucher.
Correct. First thing is I thought that the presentation by Vice President of Athletics, Courtney Gaucher, was dynamic. And when you're talking about something that is this critical and this emotional, the individual that is presenting this is significant in those efforts. And I thought he did a really good job. But to take even one step back for those that hear about boards and hear about conference churning, as we talk about it in a academic framework, is the board. So I think Trustee Lawson, who was the chair of this committee, did a really good job throughout the process to making sure that voices were heard, making sure that he explained everything he knew, made sure that he had did his due diligence, and maneuvered really well between shifting in when the president of Florida A&M should come in and speak, when he should go back to the vice president of athletics, Courtney Gaucher, and also maneuvering between the questions that trustees put on the table. And to summarize it, I thought it was perfect timing when the SGA president that has a vote on this committee component made the statement about the student support of this, which is something that I'm not sure I've heard a lot of talking points about. So I wanted to make sure we brought that to the table, is that he stated that the students were excited about this move, the idea of playing for, in his exact words, playing Southern home and away every so often was something that he saw with many of the students talking about through his Twitter information, that we're excited about that. So all in all, I thought it was dynamic. It was intriguing to be able to live through that experience and now to be able to talk about it. One thing that you always want to look at a bigger picture, one thing that came out of this also is my experience of following, reviewing other conferences expansions and teams churning and leaving conferences. Is recently when we talked about Texas A&M coming from this area, leaving the Big 12 at that time, going into the SEC, along with Missouri ultimately, and just the dynamics of how much was done on the backside. So when they got to the board level, even though that is an open component, that it seems to be done a little more behind the scenes than what we see it maybe at this level between Florida A&M's board and what I've experienced at other HBCUs for that matter. So that inexperience, if you kind of looked at of dealing with this conference changing, and that could be a positive thing from the standpoint that you don't see HBCU conferences churning that much, other than what we recently saw of MEAC the last couple of years. And for that point, it's usually teams coming in and they're not coming from another conference. They're usually independent programs, so you don't have as much of that taking place. So that's the one thing that I thought I would add in regards to outside of how things went very positive that I would like to bring to the table. But all in all, to close it out, I think it was very dynamic. In the first hurdle, which was significant and huge, is it coming out of the committee 5-0. Was extremely strong statement in terms of what we should probably see tomorrow morning in terms of the final vote in making this move from leaving out of the MEAC and into the SWAC.
AD, what are your thoughts as you heard and observed the presentation?
I want to concur with Doc. Very good presentation by Vice President Gosha. Had a chance to review the presentation because it was available online before the trustee meeting. So he basically went over the same presentation that I had already reviewed. A lot of numbers in here. Obviously, with the numbers becomes a lot of forecasting, a lot of educated guesses, because that's all there is right now. There are a lot of interesting and relevant questions raised by some of the board members from other committees. And you guys correct me if I'm wrong because you were on there also. I think the athletic committee was pretty unanimous as far as how they wanted this vote to go and how they perceived it. Some of the questions that I saw during the presentation were from members of the other committees who did not have that vote today, but will ultimately be voted possibly in the finance committee, and then once again when it comes to assuming it gets out of finance, when it comes to the general board of trustees for everybody to vote on. So those are just a couple of things, and then the eye-opening thing to me was the comments by the attorney for Florida A&M with some contract language and some other things that were not made aware of previously that she picked up. And that's why you keep attorneys, that's why you keep them on retainer, that's why they make $200, $300, $400 an hour, because their job is to read the fine print, and she read the fine print on a few things and a couple of things that FAMU is going to have to do legally to make sure that they've got their themselves covered on the backside.
Right. That's a good point. I think there's for anybody watching us, we want to encourage you. This presentation is the presentation by Courtney Gaucher, the Vice President and Athletic Director, essentially, of Florida A&M University. That presentation is available. If you go to FAMU's website and do a search for the Board of Trustees, there is the presentation available there in a PDF document. So the entire presentation is available. And so, guys, I know that the two main points I think that kind of came out of this, and I want to kind of go through maybe the presentation, but the two main points, and you correct me if I'm wrong, AD, you mentioned one of them, which is some very interesting language in the contract with the MEAC, but then also I think the funds or the fee for leaving the MEAC was also something that kind of bounced around from different individuals, and that is essentially a $250,000 exit fee that, if sent to the MEAC before July 1, that's part of the exit agreement, or the part of the exit from the conference. That's sort of the fee that comes with that. And I think a lot of the questions came from, where is this money coming from? How does it have to be paid back? Things of that nature. Was there another major point that came out of it?
Well, I was going to sum up how they said that money was going to be paid, and I'll break it down as simple as possible. It's basically through what I like to call a payroll deduction. You get certain monies from the Mid-East Athletic Conference as part of their revenue sharing agreement amongst all teams, where they're just going to hold their $250,000 out of the money that you would give to them, i.e., just like a payroll deduction if you signed up for some type of insurance through your job. They just taking it off the top. You never see the money. It doesn't directly come out of your pocket. You just get less to take home. Am I correct on that, Doc?
Yeah, that was basically the scenario that they were putting on the table, that there is a certain amount of money that usually comes to each of the 10 schools, each of the schools in the MEAC. I know it's been moving, so I don't know why I said 10 there, but I think I'm so happy right now in regards to what's going on there. But the fact is that each conference makes a payout to its institutions, and for the MEAC, what they were essentially saying that it was about $600,000. And so the payout is like $250 if you do it within a year's time. So the clock on here, and it was very important that it was going to be done now, because July 1st is the key target date that it needs to be done, or you go from a $250K fee that needs to be paid to the MEAC to $500K. But essentially what you're bringing up is the fact is it will be subtracted out or deducted from what the payout the MEAC and FAMU would have gotten from the MEAC. So you're talking about $650 just for round numbers minus $250. The FAMU would get $400,000. So that's one way to look at it. I've also heard discussions that there might be a way for the SWAC to even look at moving FAMU up on the MEAC SWAC challenge to put them in a position to play in that and get the payout from that, get an extra bump to allow them to be even more whole and pay that directly to the SWAC. So, pay that directly to the MEAC in terms of X and P. So there's many ways that you can get it done, and essentially what comes out of that is that it really will not be in a way that is physically detriment to FAMU is the big thing coming out of that question that was on the table.
Right. I think coming into this, there was maybe some people had questioned. We had started hearing some rumblings that we didn't quite know if Dr. Robinson was 100% behind, or at least we heard that Dr. Robinson had some questions, but it came through quite clear in the presentation with the board and committee folks that he was 100% behind this move, and even got involved in sort of clarifying some questions that a few board members had. Now, the other point of contention there had to do with, which was brought up by the attorney, and unfortunately, I don't have her name right offhand. If either of you jotted that down, I unfortunately did not, but the university's attorney brought up a provision which was found in the contract that had stated something to the effect of, in addition to the $250,000, that there would be some sort of a 4-year scheduling obligation, which would also have to be met or agreed upon to sort of, I guess, let go or look past. And it was sort of believed that that provision kind of came out of the Hampton University departure, which happened back in, what was that, 2017, a couple years ago?
Yes.
Yeah. So, as we know, Hampton, when they left, Hampton was originally supposed to play MEAC schedule in 2018, but they essentially were taken off of everyone's schedule. Basically, everyone in the MEAC was told, do not play Hampton for that 2018 season. And so, Hampton was out of the conference, basically left to try to, field games against whomever they could. And everyone from the MEAC had to sort of make adjustments to their schedule. And of course, when North Carolina A&T moved, North Carolina A&T is actually given almost a full year notice now, a little over a year notice. So this actually upcoming season is North Carolina A&T's last year.
It'll be about 15 months for A&T.
Andrew?
I said it'll be about a 15-month notice for A&T.
Right, 15-month notice. And so Florida A&M is trying to get in right before that July 1 window so that the conference essentially has a 12-month window and that the scheduling for this year could be completed. Now, I don't know, Drew, Doc, I have doubts that the MEAC has scheduled outside of this past upcoming season. I don't know if they've done 4 years of scheduling. Or any thoughts on that 4-year provision?
Yeah, I think it would be a challenge for the MEAC because of all the people that have left so recently over the last 2 years, 3 years, if you would, for them to have an extended schedule, even if they had one, because it would have had to be updated in regards to how you look forward. But I think that's a great point that you're making up. And essentially that was Professor Anne Marie Cavil, C-A-V-A-Z-O-S, so I apologize if I pronounced her name incorrectly there. She is the president of the FAMU Faculty Senate and professor of the law school. So it makes sense now that she went through the legal documents with the fine cop. I think she was the one that brought that to the table. And in doing that in regards to understanding that question about the 4-year part of the schedule versus what we've seen coming back and the need to make this decision at this time in terms of July 1st date that we keep putting on the table, which is extremely important, is when you look at that framework, what's also intriguing about that is there's a difference between what's on paper and what is the practice. Now, obviously, you need to, make sure that you are within the legal framework and protect yourself, but you also need to look at what's the practices, and the practices is that once you make a declaration to lead a conference, you have that 1-year season. Some extended out there, but for the most part, people don't want to play you after that. And then the challenging part about that is also, why would you want to put somebody on your schedule where the game is not going to count towards a championship? Because if you're not careful and you make them play these games, then are you saying, are they still eligible for the championship? And why would you want to have somebody eligible for the championship more than 1 year if they have told you at some point they are moving to another conference? So there's the practicality of what takes place versus what's on paper and the extent of what you were trying to do. And essentially when you're doing that from a conference perspective, what you're trying to do is protect yourself to make sure the teams give you as long a period of time for the decision to be made so that you can make a move in regards to your next expansion piece of the puzzle, which is what we call conference turning again, is that for every time you lose somebody, you're trying to bring somebody in a period of time. And so you want that time to be able to do
that. Let's take a look at some of the details of the reasons given in the study. And I thought this study was interesting, guys, and let's talk about that for a moment. This study that's mentioned, which was used as part of the background behind why FAMU should look to move from the MEAC to the SWAC. Most recently, it was a 5-month study that was done, and I thought that the 5 months was kind of interesting because A.D. Gaucher has been on the job since the end of November. So you do the math, this is probably about 6 or 7 months that he's been on the job. So needless to say, when this study started, we could probably presume that he was maybe a month into the job before this study came out, and that's a big swing for a new athletic director to make. early on.
Yeah, this is a career making move or a career devastating move in regards to that. So it's extremely important that you do everything to check out every box and look at it. And that's another reason why it's important to actually outsource it to a consulting company. And then I think another thing that he did was wise counsel in the fact that whatever he got back from this study, he also matched it to a previous study that was done that provided some correlation, that made some support that this was not necessarily just a move that Courtney Gaucher wanted to make, but this was a move in regards to him as a steward, as the VP of Athletics, making it based on the best principles and business decisions of what's taking place in regards to what has transpired in the MEAC recently, what's going on with COVID-19 pandemic, and what's going on in regards to the business frameworks of how Florida A&M University as an institution should move forward. And I think that's important to get on the table, and because there's a lot of cultural history associated with this. And that's not something that we should take lightly, that there's a historical component of this. There was a lot of ebbs and flows, mostly great relationship in regards to the MEAC, especially being historical as one of the founding, one of the footprints and first couple of institutions to join the conference in terms of moving forward. Obviously, we know the history that they've left essentially twice for really short periods of time, so that flirtation in regards to looking for better opportunities has always been there. But with all these other components taking place, then it comes to a point where you say, all right, we need to move forward with this decision. So the fact that Courtney Gaucher, in my opinion, had the courage to do this work, and I'm sure that he had a lot of conversation with a lot of people that wanted to look at this. And obviously the move by North Carolina A&T is extremely important puzzle in regards to such a big, significant part of the conference making the move, that you have to be progressive, strategic, ahead of the curve, if nothing else, to make sure that you're not one of the last people standing in the conference. And that's where it gets more devastating for the MEAC, because they do have to find their footing somewhere in regards to how do they stabilize things. Because now you look as if things are finalized tomorrow, you have another one of the significant puzzle pieces that are gone. And we can get maybe a little more into that conversation a little later about what's next for the MEAC, but a lot of this obviously is about what's going on with FAMU, and then later obviously we can get into even some more conversation in terms of what's next for the SWAC. But right now this focus point is on FAMU, and it's appropriately on FAMU in terms of them doing what they strategically believe within the finances of what is best for that institution. And so that's the way that I look at it in those various components in terms of MEAC, SWAC, and Florida A&M University.
Somebody on the screen had said something about all those different scenarios that you started laying out there, Doc, about 6 weeks ago. I'm not going to call any names out, but
We had a vision about a month ago about all this going on. Is that a hashtag humble brag? Hashtag humble brag by
exactly. AD. That's when you know you have great contacts and you have that forward vision in terms of.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just, you know, and foresight in regards to how you come up with those things, and a little bit of all that magic comes to the play. And look what happens. And you were one of the first people that brought this to the table, and I think you get a lot of credit for this. Obviously, HBCU Game Day, you know, give them a little shout out in terms of them breaking the framework of the presentation in a lot of ways. But I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the point, AD, that you were one of the first to put this on the table, and you allowed me to come in to talk about that after you did some research and saying, hey, this is an individual that can give us a different perspective. So thanks for that opportunity. The last thing I will add is the fact that that was a large component in regards, in a lot of ways, you all bringing me to the team up with Roy Evans that's behind BCSN as we continue to grow and move things forward. So I want to say personally, thank you to both of you all for giving me a platform and creating this new platform for my team in terms of Mike and Charles with the Dr. Cavill's inside the HBCU Sports Lab. So thanks, guys.
And it was look, Doc, we're just glad you allowed us to jump on the coattails, sir. You know, we appreciate it. You know, you helped us. The door was already open. You said, you know, we appreciate the hand. No, I thought it was kind of interesting, and we were chatting about this offline. I want to say maybe Trustee Dortch, I think he may be a big fan of your article and maybe of our show, because there was maybe a little point in there where I could have sworn some of the things that was said, it sounded real like some of the stuff was in your article, AD, and even in our podcast. So good to know some people might be listening out there. Just say it. Just felt that way.
Because he did bring up the fact that another team may be leaving the MEAC in addition to FAMU, and a couple of teams maybe consider going down to Division II. And when I did that together, that was just research and just looking at the landscape of it and thinking about it. That was no inside information on that, outside the one piece of inside information that we did have. But
right,
great point. I thought that was interesting to see that how much level of respect and input we have when we put things out there. And that's why you painstakingly did your research and took the time and efforts to put it out there, because if somebody did read it, it needed to be plausible. It needed to be meaningful. It needed to be of substance. And obviously, when you see people of that magnitude at the Board of Trustees level, Board of Regents of other institutions at a board level, to even look at it and consider it is a major statement. So kudos to you.
And this is going to be a discussion for another day, but two very important questions that come to my mind after today's first vote. A, what about Bethune? Because now Bethune is out there literally on an island in the MEAC, on the coast of Florida. Number one, and number two, really, what about the health of the MEAC, both short term and long term? What really does become of the MEAC? You know, a lot of the stuff that I talked about was speculation, a little bit of humor behind it, and things like that. But this may be a roadmap that we really did not want to go down, but we may be forced to go down, especially if you're a MEAC fan. You know, and I'm gonna say this about Bethune. I did some research yesterday in anticipation of this. Right now, Bethune's average bus ride to a game in the MEAC is 11 hours. That's the average, you guys. Wow. That means in order for an average, you got to have some above and some below.
Right.
So, and I'm going to take that 11 hours and really break it down to you. When I go into there are only 2 trips that Bethune can take that are under 10 hours if they remain in the MEAC.
Wow.
I'm going to leave that conversation.
Yeah,
right? That's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, definitely. Let me bring it back to this study that was done that we were talking about a little bit, because I think there were 2 interesting points about this study. We talked about one, the timing, 5 months, and really, you know, probably maybe a month into Gaucher's AD Gaucher's time as the AD. But also, I think it should be noted, Dr. Cavil, you mentioned that previous study. The previous study was done in 2013. It was mentioned in this presentation, and that study in 2013 also recommended that FAMU should look to move to the SWAC. Now, what's interesting, in 2013, the interim president of Florida A&M University was Dr. Robinson, who started as the interim president prior to becoming the full-time president, or I guess I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, becoming the active president of the university. So there's somebody who had, the current active president. So there's someone who had intimate knowledge of that survey. Somebody who had intimate knowledge of that survey from 7 years ago. And obviously Florida A&M was in a different place in terms of its administrative staff, not only just overall, but even within its athletic department at that time. So now you have a more stable university in terms of its personnel. I think, and the timing of things, it just kind of worked in sync with bringing that study back up and seeing if, hey, we're trying to save money. This is a great opportunity for us to reduce some of the expenses and at the same time grow our revenues and grow our exposure to another level. And then the second point, in the study, if you heard, obviously a lot of the focus was on the SWAC and the MEAC, but there was even mention of a third conference that was used as a comparative tool why moving to the SWAC was a better move. And I think we speculated a lot as terms of who that third conference was. And Doc, I think you had an idea who that third conference was.
Yeah, from my sources, what I was hearing was the Atlantic Sun. I think there might have been outside that the third one was the Big South, but I was hearing that Big South was not a realistic option for FAMU as they were going through this process. So to me, it looks like it was Atlantic Sun and then probably FAMU football playing as an independent in some capacity, or trying to find a home for football only, which probably makes it why it became more apparent that the SWAC was really the only choice in regards to all the different components that FAMU wanted to look at in terms of making a move, which I would put out there is probably wanting to be able to continue the cultural relationship with HBCU. Obviously, the travel benefits was huge in terms of what that would mean, revenue sources, and the fact that when you start looking at comparables of SWAC teams visiting in the last couple of years, what type of attendance impact you had for those institutions versus what you were seeing in the SWAC, and what you saw for playing other Division IIs when they came in, or playing some what I refer to as historically white colleges and universities. So when you add up what a consultant says that is independent, and a consultant for the most part, being one myself, is we don't advocate a certain direction. What we do is we look at all the information and we put it in a chart in such a way that this is the pros and cons for making this move, this is the pros and cons for making this move, and this is the pros and cons for making this move. In this case, it was 3 of them essentially. And then we said, hey, based on this information, you do what you think is best for you. So for the most part, most good consultants do not advocate a direction. They just put all the information in a concise form, so it's easier for the people that are asking for the work to be done to be reviewed, so they can make their decision. And it's another tool when they obviously usually have to dialogue with other people in regards to when a individual makes a recommendation, i.e. in this case, Vice President of Athletics, i.e. in this case, the trustee over this committee that is looking at this, i.e. in this case, it would be the president of the university, i.e. in this case, the National Alumni Association, if they're on board, which I've heard they are, i.e. indication in terms of the national president of the foundation, which was on board in terms of what I'm hearing in this case, which you start to see how things grow, which was probably different from what you saw back in 2013 when it was a study and maybe 1 or 2 people supporting this. But with everything that has changed, you got all these other individuals now to say, this is the right time, this is the right decision, let's move forward. And ultimately, we've seen that recommendation by the Board of Trustees and the committee with the 5-0 vote to say, yes, let's move it forward to the Board of Trustees to make an overall decision. And that's how it starts to play out.
But before we get ready to wind it down here from our review, I just want to make mention of some of the pros and cons of the MEAC versus the SWAC, which were brought up in the presentation. And there were 4 to 5 bullet points as to why go to the SWAC and why, or I guess it's more categorized as a conference update. But if you read it, it sounds more of a pro and con kind of list. Under the listing for the SWAC, you have reduces travel expenses by 30% at a value, and that was valued at $400,000. You had the alignment with strong brands and stronger revenue exposure with a value of, and I think, of course, we talk about those strong brands. It was mentioned that the Florida A&M game against Southern brought in revenues of nearly $300,000 versus the top MEAC opponent that they played, in which brought in about $75,000. And so we're talking probably Southern versus the North Carolina A&T. Well, actually, who did FAMU play for homecoming? You recall, AD or Doc?
No, not off the top of my head. And you got to remember, A&T game probably would have brought in good numbers, except that was the hurricane weekend when the game got moved to the Sunday. So that probably would have, maybe not 300,000, but it definitely would have did it over 100.
So that's 75,000. I would estimate probably the homecoming game, right? If I had to guess.
Which is true, and you put that out there, but I think it's important in context to talk about that game in itself is not a game that is guaranteed to be played, because it's no longer a conference game after next year. So while you do need to think about, yes, A&T brings a good crowd, and it's more likely if FAMU stayed in the conference that they probably would play that game. But because it would no longer be a conference game after this year, you have to be careful about how you continue to put that in as a revenue opportunity in terms of playing in the MEAC as a conference game that has a larger attendance. In fact, that becomes a negative when you start looking at the fact that that game is not going to be played in a conference framework. It's a game that you can still play as a non-conference game, which you could do whether you were in the MEAC or the SWAC. So I think, AD, as you bring that up, it's a great point, but we need to always take that deeper dive and say, all right, what does that mean when you look forward in terms of what's taking place here? So fascinating when you start really bringing all this up in terms of what that looks like.
Yeah, of course, those strong brands. I mean, Grambling, Jackson State, Southern. Those are just some of the premier names that you think about in the SWAC. And of course, if you start thinking about, the alignment of similar fan bases and institutional autonomy. Doc, explain for someone who, and I'll admit, when I read that about institutional autonomy, explain a little bit about what that means a little bit.
Yes, and autonomy is, like we think about, is what do you have the ability to do as your institution. So the benefits of joining a conference are oftentimes the fact that you have these scheduling agreements that allow it to take place, so you don't have to go and look for multiple games when you know you have it. And obviously you have a set of games where you can play for a championship, and then therefore the way the NCAA is set up, if you win the conference, you go through the NCAA tournament. But in this case, when we're talking about autonomy, we're also talking about, outside of that, what are the revenue deals that the conference has that either support the program or it sometimes could be adverse to them. So for a specific example, you could have an autonomy deal that I believe was referenced in this dialogue, was like in the SWAC. Both conferences have a deal with ESPN, but the MEAC actually did an additional deal with a streaming platform. The name escapes me right now, which means that you sell away your first rights, right? And then they sold away their second rights, which are the secondary rights. And then in this case, you could have what you call tertiary rights. So if we give another example, just to make this even more clear, is you can think of what happened in the SEC. SEC gives its first rights away to CBS, and now that changes with the newest deal that is going to ESPN that bought all of them. But the first rights previously at the SEC was going to CBS. The secondary rights, right, was going to ESPN, and they bought a bulk of games. And then what you had was your tertiary rights that went back to the institution. So the institution could either create their own network at the institution, they could go get a regional deal to cover the games and make money off of that, or they could give away for free and put it online and what have you if they want, right? Well, the SEC said, we want you to cut out all your deals. The conference bought back those rights, and then they went to ESPN and said, let's do a SEC network. You saw that with the ACC, with the Big Ten and what have you. Well, the SWAC has done more of a model of that, where they said, we want the first rights, which we've given away to ESPN. I'll take the money as a conference, and then it'll be part of the money that we build as a conference, and then we'll divvy it back out in terms of the bottom line of how well the conference is doing, and you'll get that money in that way. Now, there's some subsets of that where there's some money paid directly for the school if they have a home game. But the secondary rights, what the SWAC has done, is like, we'll keep them as a SWAC, and if we have the ability, we'll do that. But we'll do even better than that. If we're not hosting the game or catching it as a SWAC game, we'll give you back institutionally the autonomy to have your tertiary rights. So Texas Southern, what they have done is they had the ability to go negotiate a TV deal where they sold it regionally, if you would. Southern has done something similar as well. And then they negotiated a deal with the tertiary rights for any game that's not on ESPN, any game that is not with the SWAC. Then the school has the right to put that on television, find a way to make some revenue money off that deal. The way that the MEAC is set up is they took all those rights. So the conference does not, or the institution does not have the autonomy to go get that tertiary rights. Essentially, the MEAC sold the first rights to MEAC, second rights they sold to a streaming platform, and then so they kept all those rights. And so when they gave it to the streaming platform, they essentially sold the secondary and tertiary rights to them. They don't have it. Another way to look at that quickly, if you would, is in terms of the apparel deal. So the SWAC and the MEAC, and even previous to that, you may remember that the SIAC and CIAA had these deals with Russell Athletics. And CIAA, I think, was the first to exit out of that deal when it came back for contract rights. And then later SIAC did it, and they have a conference deal now with Nike. And then most recently, you saw the deals and negotiation between the MEAC and SWAC. Well, the difference with what the SWAC ultimately decided to do is they said, all right, we'll get out of the conference apparel business and we'll give all the rights back to the institution, right? So they have the autonomy to go do their own rights. So there was a lot of chatter over the last couple of years. For example, Texas Southern University has Under Armour. Prairie View A&M University has Adidas. Jackson State has Nike. So each institution has their own deals that they did, and they're able to leverage that to get the revenue, and they get to do their own independent contract negotiation, which they thought they could do better than if the conference did it as a whole and then provided that money back to the institution. Well, it's my understanding in the MEAC, there was some discussion of that, and when they made the deal, they let the schools that wanted to be independent, which was 2 or 3 schools. Morgan, I think, being in the area of Under Armour, I think they did an Under Armour deal. I think Howard did some other deal. But the rest of the schools said, all right, we'll stay together and collectively we'll agree to a Nike deal. So once the other schools did that, then those rights were gone because they sold it as a collective, the rest of the 9 schools as a collective. So as long as they're in the MEAC, you don't have the autonomy for FAMU to go get its own deal. And leaving the MEAC means they're no longer held to that clause. And so now they get to become autonomous and go get their own independent contract. And VP Courtney Gosher believes that he can get a better deal independently at FAMU with his brand, and probably even more so with it being part of the SWAC, where bigger eyeballs are on them now than if they stayed with the MEAC and having the deal that the MEAC provides.
Yeah, that last point you brought up excellently there, the autonomy of multimedia and apparel agreements, that being part of that 4th bullet point of why the move to the SWAC. And then moving it over to the MEAC, the things about the MEAC that were brought up, concerned over sustainability and membership expansion, limited revenue exposure, extreme travel costs, which we've all talked about, fan empathy, and required conference deals, some of which you just brought up. So that, in conjunction with what I thought was a great financial presentation, AD, as an economist, as you looked over the financial presentation, and they projected out a 5-year path. Of course, in the presentation, not only did they have a budget for this upcoming year, but they also had a adjusted COVID-19 related budget. And if I saw correctly, the difference in budgeting was maybe about $3 million in difference. So they projected out a 5-year window after the 21-22 year, if I'm not mistaken, and they showed a 5-year window in which, you know, if FAMU is in the SWAC, these are our projections overall. And then they also showed from just maybe one sport, football, the projections as well. And when you look at the numbers, it's mind-blowing, the potential. And I think those are minimum numbers, if I'm not mistaken. You know, it almost feels like
conservative. Yep.
Yeah, conservative numbers, obviously, which is smart given the fact that we're kind of in the midst of this COVID-19. But still, you look at the numbers and the potential growth of 5 years down the road, what it means to the university and the brand versus staying in the back. So I don't know, AD, if you had time, if you want to give some general thoughts or anything that you thought as you saw the numbers.
The only thing about the numbers, and I think I brought this up to you guys, is some of the SWAC numbers that they were talking about were current SWAC numbers, where the things that are divided amongst the schools, amongst the pie, are divided by 10. With FAMU coming in, you have to take that same pie, and now you're going to be divided by 11, and probably ultimately 12. And that from what I was seeing, was not reflected in some of their models of the money guarantees that they would get from the SWAC. So is the FAMU brand by itself going to make up that difference when you divide it by 12, but it's still going to be the same? Or is it actually going to wind up being smaller, not only for FAMU, but for the other members of the SWAC? I think that was the one thing that you have to be careful of when you look at the numbers, because I think I said before, you can make the numbers say anything that you want to, but you have to know how to, I think you said it, Doc, numbers don't lie. The people who report the numbers may lie. So you got to make sure that you're looking at it correctly. I'm not saying anybody's lying, but you really have to look deep into the numbers and make sure that you're reading them correctly and using the proper assumptions when you look at the numbers.
Certainly, I think that's a great point you make. And when you quote the great poet Jay-Z that says men lie, women lie, but numbers don't. So you have to know how to read. Yeah, you do have to know how to read those numbers. But I would like to put this on the table. There's also the component of that. And so I think when you do critically, you're right. You have to look at breaking down, but that's also the assumption that revenues in the SWAC won't grow. One of the things that excites you about this, so you always do your projection low because you'd rather be under than higher. So yeah, you're right. You may not
proper models. You're correct.
Correct. And then so you might not account the fact that it's broken down 11 and possibly 12. But the question is like you said, with FAMU, now you provide the SWAC with the opportunity to go either renegotiate current deals or bring more deals in. So now the SWAC brand, and as everybody's excited about it, continues to grow. So somebody that was not necessarily looking at the SWAC or just doing it, now all of a sudden when you go in the deal and say, hey, we just got FAMU. And let's play this out, like you said, it's a 12 school, and let's say that 12 school happens to be Tennessee State University. Now you're saying, yeah, we are the SWAC, and we have the top 5 largest conference games now in terms of classics played in our conference. Not just components of the conference, but now you're talking about conference, because the Southern Heritage Classic becomes a conference. Well, let's say that the 12th member is Bethune-Cookman. Now the Florida Classic itself becomes in the conference. So now when you're looking at those deals, they start to expand themselves. And you are able to bring more people to the top pie in regards if you're the SWAC conference. So while there are some concerns in terms of the dip in the money, I would say the outweigh in terms of what this brand coming together does for both institutions is makes it even easier to go market and get more deals. Because what this is talking about is the partnership of 2 solid brands.
Right.
You have the solid brand of the SWAC, right, that we recognize in terms of its history and the trajectory of that brand, the brand identity, the brand association that we have with the SWAC as opposed to what you're seeing going with the MEAC. It's a strong brand, but the trajectory and brand awareness, the brand identity, the brand association people are having with the MEAC, true or not, perception-wise, that it's trending what? Down. So you have FAMU, which is strong. Do you want to be with FAMU connecting yourself with another brand that trajectory, or at least the association perception-wise is going down, or do you want to be connected with the perception of a SWAC, which perception-wise seems to be trending up? So you put those two power brands together, then it allows you to leverage even more when you go out to have brand connecting, and that's a lot of what we're talking about from a consulting-wise perspective when they do the numbers. So I wanted to make sure that was on the table, because I think your argument on the other side is extremely important for us to look at it, because you do need somebody that's critical and poking holes, if you would, in regards to any type of analytical analysis. But I like to make sure that we have that yin and yang when you bring it up. It's for me to say, all right, yeah, you're correct when you look at it, but we also must look at this as well. So great point that you bring to the table with that.
And one other thing, you know, and this is on the positive side, you know, for the SWAC, you have introduced yourself to a totally new market, both for television and other things, because you're in the Florida market now. Which, if you're thinking about marketing deals, it may not be beneficial for the SWAC to add a Bethune, because now you've got a team in the Florida market. If you try to expand markets, it's more beneficial for you to get that Tennessee market. You know, same footprint what the SEC did when they added the Texas market and the Missouri market, the Midwest market. They went after those strategically to get those television markets. Now, obviously, we know television doesn't play as big of a role in HBCU sports, but it does. It definitely does. One other thing we talked about.
Great point.
With FAMU coming in, and let's assume that a Tennessee State ultimately gets into the SWAC. The SWAC would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the top 30 in attendance in FCS football if Tennessee State follows FAMU into the SWAC. Well, of course, we know Jackson State is number 1.
Great point. I want to remind you, if you're watching our show, you can be watching anywhere. If you're watching us on Facebook, you're either watching us from Dr. Cavil's Inside the HBCU Sports Lab, or you're watching it on Facebook from our Black College Sports Network page or our BCSN SportsWrap. You can also be watching us on Twitter as well on the BCSN1. We'll remind you to hop over to our partner sites. Make sure to log in. So if you're on the SportsWrap or BCSN, make sure to jump over to Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. Make sure to get make sure to like and subscribe to that page, so that way anytime we have any information coming out, when that show comes out or any other auxiliary shows, you get alerted to that. And same thing for anyone on the Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. Hopefully you're get connected into the Black College Sports Network as well. And we're going to be talking a little bit tomorrow after the final designation of what's to come. And we're all sort of under the assumption that tomorrow will be a full vote of approval by the Florida A&M Board of Trustees. No inside information here. That's just kind of the way we've seen things go. Usually, historically, when things kind of pass through committee, as someone told me, it usually gets, even with the few provisions that I think we're still trying to work out, or that the board is trying to work out, we still believe that the deal will be done. And then it'll move.
If the board could get to that long motion that was made.
Oh man, yes.
Oh,
yeah,
that was funny.
I wish. Look, I noticed a couple of people on Twitter noted as well the long motion by Trustee Dortch, and hopefully we get the true. I bless his heart. I know he was trying to get a lot in when he gave that motion, and fortunately it was second.
Had to write all that down.
Yeah, that's true.
Note in the meeting that unfortunately there was no actual person taking a recorded note, but thankfully it's being recorded so that they just can go to the video and replay it 20 times trying to figure out every word that was said. Just saying, all jokes here. It's all good though. Great job.
We kid because we care.
Exactly, we kid because we care. Hey, I want to leave you guys with one thing here before I ask you for I'm going to ask you for a question. What's your one big question following the vote tomorrow? Before we do that, I got a trivia question for you, and I'm going to go to AD first, and Doc, you may already know this. Can you think of the one team in the SWAC that Florida A&M University has never played?
Since you said Doc, I'll go guess it's Texas Southern.
I'm going to say Arkansas Pine Bluff.
Doc is correct. Doc is correct. No, yes, they have.
Doctor and I'm the professor.
Touché.
Yeah, that is correct. Arkansas Pine Bluff is the only school that is currently in the Southwestern Athletic Conference that Florida A&M University has never played. I'll share some more.
3 years.
Yeah, I'll share some statistics on some of the numbers of FAMU's history against some of the SWAC. It's not as good as you might think. I'm just going to say that flat out. It is, the historical numbers is not that great in terms of, but still, it's all good. So we'll go to you guys, Doc, and then AD, and then I'll give my final question. What's your one question that you want to sort of look into, or maybe that you have following this announcement?
My question that I have for Florida A&M's VP of Athletics, Courtney Gosha, as well as the Commissioner of the SWAC, Dr. Charles McCullen, would be what will the format of the conference look like in terms of the games for the various sports. I'm extremely interested in terms of what options are available, how will they look at it. And obviously, this is in perception that the full board will ratify the committee's recommendation tomorrow, and the fact the next step needs to take place, that the SWAC board of presidents and chancellors will ratify to take them in. What does that look like? I believe that before they even start doing so much work in terms of scheduling, that you will quickly see the SWAC make a move for Tennessee State University. So that's going to be interesting to me to see how quick that plays out and what does that look like and what will take place, which will obviously have ramifications of what the schedule looks like in terms of going forward. The next thing I have out there, if you let me kind of sneak it in, as the second part of that question would be, what other schools now are going to be calling Dr. Charles McCullen, the commissioner of the SWAC, saying that they have interest?
Okay. AD, what's your question coming into after tomorrow's announcement?
I have to break mine into a 1A and a 1B.
All right.
Okay. 1A. What about Bethune? What happens to Bethune? Bethune's out there on that island. Does Bethune become the first private school to be a member of the SWAC? Do they remain in the MEAC? Or do they go to another conference? That's the what about Bethune. That's number one. The 1B to that is, what about the MEAC? Does the MEAC, so there are no more HBCUs out there for the MEAC to go and get. Does the MEAC start asking PWIs to join their conference so that they can survive as a conference? And I'm gonna throw this out there. If that's the case, they need to reach to the state of Georgia. They need to look at 2 schools in the Atlanta area if they're gonna go and get PWIs: Georgia State, Kennesaw State, because of how many black people you have in Atlanta, how many HBCU alumni chapters in Atlanta. If those teams, when those other teams, when Central comes, South Carolina State come to Atlanta to play, it may be something interesting.
That's interesting.
I think that's going to be interesting from the framework, because then you would be talking about Georgia State is looking to come down from playing at the FBS level to go to the FCS. Is one thing, and then Kennesaw State, you're talking about them defecting from the Big South that just got a member in terms of the institution. So one thing that I like everybody to consider when they talk about conferences, and I'll leave it here and won't go too much deeper, is it's easy for a member of a conference to have eyes looking outward, meaning that they would like to join a conference, but it's two of them that go that way. And so there has to be a conference that has interest in bringing that team in, and that's vice versa. If you have a team that wants to get into the MEAC, you're assuming that either they are ready to leave the conference they are in to go to the MEAC, and vice versa, and those kind of components. So that's where it becomes a little more strategy and a little more challenging and difficult for these moves to happen as rapidly as it could.
My one question, gentlemen, after all this is, what happens to the Celebration Bowl in 2021? Or I guess, yeah, it'd be 2021.
Oh, there'll be a challenge in there too if you talk a Celebration Bowl, because they're one and the same. As far as
I don't know if they're one and the same, but I think they're
on the same ESPN agreement, though. That's why I say that.
Okay, well, I think more so the Celebration Bowl because of the fact that it's providing a larger venue or exposure than at the beginning of the season. I think the payout is a lot better at the end of the year in the bowl sphere. But you think about it, after this season, and I still don't, what's going to happen to bowls this year, this COVID-19 year, if you are limiting capacity in stadiums? Are bowls still happening? That's one thing. Are classics even happening this upcoming year? I think all those are questions that we all should be thinking about and asking in the next month or two. But as it relates to 2021, if FAMU leads along with North Carolina A&T brands, and of course A&T, you won 3 in a row, 4 of the last 5. There they go. And then maybe the team that you thought would replace them, FAMU, they're gone. All respect to the other teams, but they don't carry the same weight as those two schools. And so then it just becomes what happens to the Celebration Bowl? What happens to
the revenue?
Yeah,
right. I would like to put this out there, though. This also becomes an opportunity, because you're right, that's a threat. But with the threat becomes an opportunity. So now this comes an opportunity for schools like North Carolina Central to increase its brand as dominant of the MEAC, because now they no longer have to worry about A&T or FAMU. And oftentimes, certainly in terms of A&T, they're more likely to still play that game, so the revenue is not going to be lost there. Then you got places like Morgan State in terms of that. They have a chance now to increase their brand. So I think the next important question I got to sneak out there is, along with what you're saying, can somehow the MEAC at least hold steady in terms of what it has now, or do we start seeing even more defections? And then if you have more defections, then I think what you're saying comes in and really becomes a major concern, Bryan. If the next domino that it falls, that's when it becomes really scary. I think right now, because of the brand of SWAC increases so much, that ESPN is not going to want to close the deal, because they still have that one at least strong brand, and they'll deal with the other one as long as they at least have one. But if that one totally folds, then you can't have a conference championship game with one conference. A bowl game should be one conference.
Right. All right. Well, look, we've got to wrap it up, gentlemen. We appreciate you if you've been watching us on Facebook or Twitter, whether you've been on the inside the HBCU Sports Lab or on the BCSN SportsWrap or on the Black College Sports Network site. We appreciate you sticking in and watching with us. Big day, historic day for Florida A&M University. It continues tomorrow morning when the full board of trustees comes to a vote. As you can see, Doc there with his FAMU hat and his SWAC polo. there it is. That's the future. So get geared up, folks. It's a big day, big historic day for FAMU, a big day for the SWAC. Black college athletics, black college football is about to be turned on its side, and we'll see how the teams shake out. For AD Drew, AD, follow him on Twitter at BCSN Drew. Make sure to follow Dr. Cavil. Follow him on Twitter at DrKenyattacavil. Dr. Kenyatta Cavil. That's where you can find him on Twitter. And, of course, you can find me at DRB365. We are right there at my BCSN1. Black College Sports Network inside the HBCU SportsLab. And we're going to try to do something tomorrow once the announcement's made. And hopefully we have a chance to get Charles Bishop, Mike Washington, who are also part of the inside the HBCU SportsLab. And it'll be a round table discussion. Hopefully we'll have Courtney Gaucher, as maybe some other folks as well from Florida A&M, on to talk with us. Stay tuned to the Black College Sports Network for more information. For our producer, Roy Evans, and AD Drew, Dr. Kenyatta Cavil, I'm Bryan Fulford. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.
A monumental game for A&M and Tampa. It was a monumental game. Somebody had to lose, and thank God it was them this time.
We knew it was going to be a battle. Look at Jake Ave's record. 202 and 36, I think. Some off-the-wall figures.
And nobody would play him because they didn't want to take a chance of getting beat. But the truth of it is,
over 46,000 tickets. Blacks were sitting in the east stands. The whites were sitting in the west stands, and the score wound up 34-28.
The only thing we proved that we wasn't inferior, that we were not inferior, and we were not afraid.
For one night, for 160 minutes, we was better than them.
The Creole seasoning is a sodium-free and sugar-free